Okay, yeah, 13, just the second part of our revision that I talked about sending the videos through for you. So now we're going to think about audience effects. Remember that we're thinking about positive and negative effects of taking part in front of an audience, participating in front of an audience. So we've got a facilitating effect, it improves performance, or an inhibiting effect. It creates a decline in performance. Performance gets worse. Okay, so everyone agrees that spectators affect the performance of individuals. The key point is how. Alright, so we've talked about Zions' drive theory before. If you remember, Zions talked to you about with the guy who did the test with the cockroaches. What the key part with Zions' work is that he talked about present others being passive or interactive. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that somebody else is present. Zions argued that was sufficient to have an impact on arousal. So you'll see here we've got passive others, i.e. An audience that are watching silently, or a non-threatening coactor. A coactor is someone who's taking part alongside of you, like a jogging partner. It gives the example here. And interactive others is a difference between an emotive crowd and a passive crowd, but similarly competitive coactors, e.g. the opposition. So all of these are sufficient to have an impact on arousal levels, which impact on performance. Now remember, the mere presence of others is what Zions talked about, which is different to Cottrell's evaluation apprehension, which we're going to go on to talk about. So, just as there about the mere presence, that arousal increases, so would performance in line with drive theory, okay? But just be aware that if we think about drive theory, while we're under pressure, a dominant response is the thing that's most likely to occur. So we've got to be careful here around performance levels, as in stage of learning, whether or not you're an expert or a novice, what your dominant response actually is. So if your dominant response is incorrect, and therefore you're more likely to show that dominant response, therefore we're going to get an inhibiting effect on behaviour. Whereas if I'm an elite athlete and my dominant response is accurate, and I get this increase in arousal, therefore my learned behaviour is a positive one, and I'm going to get a facilitating effect. So you can see the text that's there. Performers in the autonomous stage. The autonomous stage is the expert stage. Therefore, that we're talking about that being the correct one. And then we'll talk about more likely to be and cause mistakes in the performer, and associative or lower. Okay, so we're thinking right back to the start, to beginners, novices. Cottrell's, his work was different. He didn't believe that the mere presence of others was sufficient to raise arousal levels. He suggested that the audience had to be perceived to be assessing their performance. Okay, so the text down here, assessing the performance. There's only the perception that's happening. Doesn't mean that you're actually being judged, or that you are at a trial, or you're being judged by in a competition. It's your own presence, so your own perception of whether or not you're being assessed is what the impact is there. Okay, so all the other things still apply. It's just the difference between the mere presence being sufficient or not. Home field advantage, I know you're aware about. And then we're going to talk about the proximity effect on the next slide. But basically, the belief that the home crowd causes an advantage for the home team. Now, this is a great one to come up if you want to start talking about a discussion and the positives and the negatives, because there's all sorts of reasons why the home crowd may also have an inhibiting effect. If you think about the increased pressure, increased expectation, but similarly, if we've got a supportive crowd, we've got a crowd that are really backing our team, therefore that can have a positive and a facilitating effect. So you've got to be aware of the difference there. If we go to the proximity effect, relates to the closeness of the crowd to the performers. The greater the impact on arousal is created by the closer the crowd are to them, whether it's the pitch or the court. Ice hockey and basketball are good examples of the proximity effect, where the crowd are really close. It's quite an intimate arena, whereas athletics, if I'm in the middle of an athletics pitch, crowd are very, at times very far away from me. And a nice point to drop into an exam question here would be, for example, the Olympic Stadium and West Ham moving into the Olympic Stadium, and all the argument about removing the athletics track from around the outside, and how football clubs don't want to have athletics tracks around their pitch because the crowd are too far away from the action. Okay, so how we cope with social inhibition, obviously that's a bad thing. Yeah, practicing selective attention, using visualization, practicing in front of an audience, incorporate stress management into our training. So thinking about stress managing as in managing our effects that arousal has on us, and then overlearning the skill, so the skill becomes grooved. The dominant response occurs when in the presence of a crowd because it's just a natural thing that we do. Right, make sure you're really familiar with these techniques. This is really useful stuff to you. That's just a kind of an overview there. We've got home field advantage. Ignore that one. That can be proximity effect. That's left over from a previous topic. Links with arousal, we must know that with our inverted U theory, drive theory. Negative effects and the positive effects spelled incorrectly, and then evaluation, apprehension. Okay, final thing, attribution theory. Well, basically, with attribution, just take that back, we are thinking about, and I know most of us are aware of that, the reason why coaches or performers give for success and failure. Okay, so where they attribute the blame. What do they give the reason why they've just won the match or why they've just lost? And the guy, Viner, was the famous piece of work around attribution theory. Okay, now remember when I talked to you about this, these are the examples of things. So what we're actually thinking of is the stability, whether it's a stable or an unstable thing, whether or not it's likely to change or to stay the same, and whether with an internal thing, this is to do with you as an athlete. The athlete themselves, they are in control of this. If it's an external thing, it's something that you have no control over. So an unstable external factor is luck. Your luck, you've got no control over. It's completely external and it's completely able to change. Okay, you've got no control over that. Similarly, how good the opposition you're playing, you've got no control over that as such, but that's a constant. In a game, if let's think of if York City are playing Man United, okay, the task difficulty in there remains the same because of their ability. Here, though, the internal things, the thing we do control is our own level of ability, and similarly our effort. But that's unstable, that's changing. But you control that. How much effort you put in is very much something you control. So key points are, where do people attribute the blame? Right, now you've got to be aware of, if I attribute victory to internal factors and attribute failures to external factors, what does that actually do? Well, it says here that external factors are attributed, failure is attributed to external factors to maintain confidence and self-esteem. Similarly, success is all about internal factors, it's all about the things that you've done. There's a difficulty with that if we do these too often. Okay, so if I'm always attributing attributing failure to external factors, I'm never going to look at actually what I'm doing wrong if there's something there. And similarly, if I am just getting away with things here, and we're talking about attributing victory to internal factors, just got to be aware of the impact that has on us here. TAF performers, so tendency to avoid failure, often attribute a lack of success to internal factors. They blame themselves for losing. That's learned helplessness. Remember, the feeling that failure is inevitable, so there's no point therefore trying. Task performance, a tendency to approach success, attribute success to internal factors. They've got a mastery orientation. That means they keep going until they get it right. They see failure as just a means of getting to success. They're not fighting to failure. Remember, someone with a task is a high knack. Someone's TAF is a high NAF. Attribution retraining, this is when a coach changes the way that you think about things, okay? So if we are attributing something to an external thing for failure, how do we actually change that, okay? So attributing failure to internal unstable factors such as confidence, attitude, concentration reduces the effect of learned helplessness. So why would we want to do that? Why would we want to change the way someone was thinking about it? And that's all to do with motivation, self-confidence, and our approach towards the sport that we're actually doing. Okay? Key point is let's just go back, is how do you actually do that? How do you get people to do that? Well, you've got to give them opportunities where they're experiencing success. You've got to give them the opportunity to be successful. So that might be making a skill slightly easier, making a practice slightly easier, playing against some easier opposition. But when they experience that success, you've got to give positive attributions to internal factors. You've created that success. Similarly, if we've got someone who's constantly attributing failure to internal factors, that you've got to look to move away from that through vicarious reinforcement, through positive self-talk. You've got to get people to look at the way that they attribute things and try and change that perception. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you one other video clip just on the other bits of things that I've had to do, and then obviously we've got our exam this week, which I know you're all preparing really hard for. There's just that final bit there. Learn helplessness is a key term. Attribution retraining, absolutely key. What do we do to change the way that people are attributing different failures and successes, and why would we want to do that? TAS and TAF, how that links in. Mastery orientation, like I said to you, is the feeling that we're going to just fail to get to success, and and failing is not a problem, and I'll just keep going and I won't give up. And then Viner's model, which I know you're really familiar with. Okay.